All right, let's keep looking at the performance of Dying Light 2. I already tested out my GTX 1060, which really struggled here. So this is the RX 6600 in this video, and we're going to start out at 1080p, although I will also try it out at 1440p. And this game has some useful settings, although I really wish it had FSR Ultra Quality. For some reason, they jumped straight to quality rather than Ultra Quality. And that's really frustrating because the quality mode is kind of ugly, guys, to be honest. It may be at 4K usable, but we're not testing 4K on this card. Although my RX 6800 XT video should be incoming as well. Now, if we take a look at the graphics settings here, I actually have everything on high. I'm also using the DX12 mode rather than DX11. I think that is the way to go here. And I do have asynchronous compute turned on. Now, notice I say high settings. The game has some ultra settings, but they are involving ray tracing. Now, if you're wondering, can you ray trace this game on the RX 6600? I mean, technically you can. Off screen, I did try out ray tracing on the global illumination, which is the most impactful setting. But to be honest, the game was just completely unplayable. And yeah, anyway, so let's look at the high settings rather than the ray traced settings. And as you can see here, the frame rates are very, very high, although depending on the scene, obviously it can get more demanding. As we look towards this area where there's more geometry happening, we've got some enemies going on, we are still over 60 FPS, but it is a bit more demanding. And then, we can, run around, jump the logs and all that. Now, my understanding is that this scene in the game is fairly representative of a typical scene, although there are more demanding areas of the game. But especially looking towards here, there will certainly be places in the game where I'm sure you will get lower frame rates, but there's also places, like simulated by looking this direction where you get higher frame rates. What I'm trying to say here is I think that it's perfectly acceptable to just max the game out at 1080p without ray tracing on the RX 6600, and it's fantastic. Now, that doesn't mean that it's not worth tweaking a few settings. So in the graphics settings, the biggest one for me that I think, honestly, you'd just be kind of stupid not to turn down is the fog quality. So check this out. If I go down to low instead of high, in this scene at least, there's very little difference. You can tell that there's less, there's not the fog, I think they're giving off some kind of steam or fog on these enemy characters here. And I think the cave may have had some sort of fog going on in it. But look at the frame rate difference. We have jumped like 20 frames per second. Percentage-wise, that's insane. I'm not going to bust out my calculator. I know I'm a math teacher, and I do have a calculator in my pocket. It's my phone. But anyway, there's a huge performance difference. Now, I will say, though, that there are scenes in the game where you are closer to the fog, and you can tell that it looks a little bit rough on the low setting. The medium setting does look significantly better. Again, in this scene, hard to really see the difference. And we do take a performance hit going to medium. We're now at 76 instead of 86. So that is a huge hit just going to medium. Although there will definitely be scenes in the game where the medium fog does look significantly better than the low fog. But I've got to say, at least turn the fog down to medium, or else I really think you're just giving up a huge amount of frame rate. Although, if you're on a 60 hertz monitor, just max the game out. I think you're going to be fine and rarely dip below 60, although I'm sure you will find some demanding scenes where you do. And then, hey, maybe turning the fog down to medium gives you that headroom. Now, in a scene that has more reflections in it, I also think turning down the reflections can gain you a bit of performance. But this particular scene isn't really very reflective. Anyway, so I do want to test out the performance of the game just at the all medium or all low settings. I think ambient occlusion, since there is no medium setting, I guess the low setting is actually none. So I guess I'll consider low to be medium. Yeah. Anyway, sun shadows, this is just choosing between ray tracing or not. So we're not gonna kick on the ray tracing. Particles quality, again, just has a low or high setting. So I'm gonna leave it at high for my medium test. There's no just medium preset. You have to adjust the settings individually. Motion blur, I honestly think, personally, I'd probably just play on low or off, but we'll just go ahead and use the presets here. The motion blur is kind of a personal preference thing. Anti-aliasing, I'll leave it high, I think, until we go down to the low settings. Honestly, it doesn't seem to have much performance impact anyway, to be honest. So by going down to the medium settings here, you can see that we are now up into the 80s. Although remember, by just turning fog down to low, we actually get a larger performance gain, at least in this scene, than switching everything down to medium. So like I said, that fog, that fog, man, I really think turning down the fog makes a lot of sense. So there's your quick test at the medium settings. And now I will go down to low settings, which I am going to consider like literally either low or off, right? So we're gonna go all the way down, which I don't think makes sense on this graphics card at 1080p. But we're doing a testing video, so we're gonna go ahead and test it. All right. So the game at low settings, still looks passable, and now we're like over 100 frames per second. So, if you're just all about that frame rate, there you go. Although I've got to say, even if you want to be at these extremely low settings, there are some settings that just don't make sense to turn down. For example, the ambient occlusion, you should really leave it at least at low rather than none, just because look at the difference in the grass here. Do you see how the grass actually has shadows and depth to it by just turning ambient occlusion to low? And our frame rate is still over 100 here. So I do just want to point that out, that really don't turn the ambient occlusion all the way off. Even if you're on a terrible GPU, just don't do it. Okay, so at this point, I think it makes sense to now test out how are we going to do at 1440p. Now that's the main drawback to this GPU. The RX 6600 performs extremely well at 1080p. And by the way, it's the best cost. Like, I mean, all GPUs suck in price right now, but you can regularly get these for about $460 on Newegg. They're usually in stock at that price. But the main drawback here is their performance falls off quite a bit at 1440p. I think due to the infinity cache and the memory bandwidth design on the RDNA 2 GPUs. As you increase the resolution, their performance kind of falls a bit compared to the relative performance of other GPUs at the same resolutions, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Anyway, so I'm going to kick things all the way back up for our 1440p test here. So 1440p, we don't have any ray tracing on, but other than that, we are maxed out. The game looks great, and this is certainly playable. So like, can you max out the game at 1440p on this GPU? And by max out again, without ray tracing, yeah, you definitely can. And like you can play this. And if you're on a variable refresh rate monitor that dips down to maybe like 40, at least on your refresh range, then this is fine. You could do it, but I'd highly recommend turning down some more settings. Like I said, the fog is extremely impactful. So let's see what happens if we just turn off that. We'll turn the fog to low. There's no off setting. So let's see if that does anything for us. Okay, so that gets us to 49 FPS at this more demanding scene, looking into this area. And then over here, we're actually over 60 or around 60 FPS now on the less demanding area. But I still don't think we'd be averaging 60 FPS. So, yeah, it would be nice if the fog got us there, but it didn't. So let's go ahead and look at, okay, let's just test out if we turn things down all the way to low, can we even get to 60 FPS? So let's just crank everything down. And I don't even know if 60 FPS is going to be possible at 1440p without some kind of resolution scaling, because a lot of those settings don't do a ton for us. Well, it looks like we can. Okay, so it looks like we are over 60 FPS if we go to low settings. So that's nice. So you definitely could use this as a budget 1440p card in this game and still play over 60 FPS. However, like I said, I think some settings make sense to be turned up rather than just, just crank everything down. So again, the ambient occlusion, I think instead of just turning it off all the way off, going to low makes a big difference to the visual quality of the foliage, the grass, the depth of what's going on here. And we're still over 60 FPS here. So I think that at least turning that back up makes a lot of sense. But it looks like we're barely holding that 60 FPS. So I think you do want to pretty much have things on low. And again, at least keep the ambient occlusion at low rather than off. And just for fun, let's kick everything to medium at 1440p just to see what sort of frame rates we'd be getting there. I'm gonna kick the anti-aliasing to high when I'm doing my medium test. I'll leave the motion blur at low rather than off. Particles quality, I guess I'll pick high between the low and the high, since those are the only two options. Contact shadows will go up to medium. Here we just have none, low, or high for ambient occlusion, so I'm going to stick to low as like my balance between none and high. We'll consider that medium. Global illumination will go to medium, reflections medium, and fog quality. I guess we'll go to medium. I almost want to leave it on low. Let's leave it on low. It has such a big performance hit. Let's see how we do. Hey, we're actually close to 60 FPS here. By keeping the fog quality at low, it's getting us very, very close to 60 FPS. And again, in this more, easy to run kind of view, looking out here at the waterfalls and the mountain, we're actually up into the 70s. So I think we could even consider this at least a 60 FPS average, although our minimums are definitely below 60 as we get into a more involved scene with enemies and things on screen. So it looks like you could do kind of a 1440p medium-low mix for a 60 FPS 1440p experience. Now, the last thing that we could try out is some resolution scaling. But again, I hate that they don't have the FSR Ultra Quality option in the game. But what I really want to look at here is, could we play the game at high settings 1440p and then use the FSR to try to gain the frame rate rather than turning down settings? That's what we're going to take a look at. So, high settings 1440p, currently no res scaling. We're kind of in the mid-40s when we're looking at this scene, about 45. Does the FSR get the job done? So FSR Quality. Boost us up over 70, which is why I hate the fact that they don't have the Ultra Quality option. Because if our target is 60 FPS, we don't need to be this aggressive on the FSR. We could do the Ultra Quality setting if it was there, but for some reason it's not. I'm hoping they patch it back in, because I can definitely tell that my screen is much blurrier than a native 1440p. And while I can usually tell Ultra Quality is on, it's a much less obvious, less dramatic degrading of the image quality. So I've got to say, I don't think I would use the FSR Quality here. I would probably rather just turn settings down, or rather than use that, I think the FSR Quality is actually going below 1080p. So even though you're on a 1440p screen, you could just straight up turn the game resolution down to 1080p. And as we already demonstrated earlier, 1080p at maxed out settings does get you a solid above 60 FPS in this area. So yeah, there you go. Anyway, that's my conclusion. I've got to say that I think the RX 6600 handles this game great. As we can see here, 1080p High settings with no ray tracing looks to be a great experience. 1440p, you've got to make some compromises, but you know, a mix of medium and low settings at 1440p can get you there to 60 FPS, or just, you know, scale it to 1080p and call it a day and max everything out. I'll also be testing out my RX 6800 XT, and on that one we'll also go to 4K, and maybe ray tracing will be possible on that one. We'll see. Have an excellent day.